Just opened it up, see if anybody shows up. I think it's important that we understand that the Bible is mythology because it's amazing. So I believed the Bible was true a year ago and for all my life. But now that I see that it's mythology, it's amazing to me how much energy people waste on trying to understand a book that has nothing to do with them and is just human philosophy. It's amazing. People are devoting their lives and getting degrees and jobs to talk about a book that was written 2,000 years ago that has nothing to do with them because they think this is what defines who God is. But yet, the God as described in the Bible is a God of vengeance and wrath, and there's no love in that God. That God, and Jesus even came saying that you had to hate your family, which is a violation of the Torah. So you can't say Jesus was sinless because Jesus said that you should hate your father and mother, which is a sin to say that. And he even said it himself. I'm thinking it's in Matthew chapter 15, where he even quoted, whoever curses father or mother should be put to death, and then he does it. I'm not sure it's Matthew 15. I was watching my TikTok video earlier. I was like, man, I need to remember where that verse is. Yeah, apologetics. I'm waiting on you. So I would like to debate it. Join me. We'll talk about it. Come on, jump in. I'm sending you an invite.
Hey, what's going on, Jeff?
Oh, not much. Same old stuff.
Yeah, I see that. So, in terms of the debate, are you looking to do it in person, online?
Nah, I think unless, where are you?
I'm in Texas.
Yeah, I'm not planning to go to Texas, and I don't expect you to come to Tennessee. So,
Okay.
so there are different people that could host it on YouTube. I've had one debate before on some channel. We could do it on TikTok even. So that part to me really don't matter. I think if we can, if we schedule it like a month out, we can figure out the details.
Okay. And are you looking, I would assume that you're looking to have some kind of format and it be timed and
Yeah,
moderated and all. Okay.
right. Because that way, we're not over talking each other and getting
Mhm.
mad because, whatever, you get
Right.
20 minutes opening and I get 20 minutes opening and then we get, 10 minutes
Well,
rebuttal or whatever.
well, what I was considering was writing a book, and I actually started a good portion of it, but to write a book in response to yours, just so you would have my position, so you would have something to argue against.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I have any videos or any material currently out in response
Well,
to this specific argument.
so, I could just ask you questions and understand your position. And we could do it that
Um,
way.
sure, yeah. Well, we could, if you just want to get my position on it, either privately or maybe have like a pre-debate discussion.
Yeah,
Um,
so I guess that's what you call it. It would just be like a preparatory, and it's not debate. It's just making sure that we understand each other's position, so we don't prepare for
mhm.
something that's irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, the difference though is I have an advantage because you have your position written down and published. I don't.
Not really. I was a Christian for 30 years, so
Well,
I
no, I
think
mean I have an advantage in knowing what you believe.
right,
Is all.
right. So you'll know my arguments.
Yeah.
Uh, I might come up with some new arguments that I didn't put in the book, but my book will essentially be my arguments.
Right. And yeah, and I'm still working through it amongst all the other things I have going on and just taking notes. But it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that the the foundation of your argument starts with full preterism. Is that correct?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think when I learned full preterism, then I asked myself, why would God only send His Son to one generation and then expect us to hold us accountable to what He did 2,000 years ago? That didn't make sense to me, uh, and so I just continued to ask myself why. And when I found one answer, I would dig a little deeper and say, well, why is that?
Hmm.
And so that question, why would God only send Jesus to a first century generation and tell them that He was only for them and not for me? So, well, that's not nice.
Yeah, which so the basis for my argument would be essentially to kind of try to demonstrate how full preterism is wrong. I am personally, I'm a partial preterist. So on some arguments you have like against like Matthew chapter 24 and Jesus talking to that generation, I completely agree with you on. I just don't go to the full preterist position on it. But I'm more concerned with your view of full preterism as it relates to your assertion of the writing of the Gospels and the writing of the New Testament. Because if it's true that Jesus was talking about something that already happened in the past, then why would it be the case that the Gospels would be written after that thing would already have happened?
Because that's the way the entire Bible was written. That's the way all religious books are written. They wait until after the event and then they create a mythical prophet who supposedly lived in the previous generation, so that they could say God sent us a prophet.
But
So
that's not
I
how
don't.
most of the text is written that way, especially within if you look at First and Second Thessalonians and a lot of Ephesians, it's written as if this stuff is about to come to pass. Even in the book of Revelation, he says the things I'm writing are yet to take place. But if they're writing after the events have already taken place, then what are they talking about?
Right. So that they're pretending that it's a prophecy, but it's really not, because that's what makes it look like a that God came and spoke to them, because they are pretending that it's a prophecy, even though it was written later.
But I don't see how that's compatible with the full preterist position, though. Unless
Well,
you're unless you're considering full preterism to be not from a theological point of view, but from a kind of secular historical
well,
point of view.
so preterism is what led me to mythicism. So my understanding of how the Bible was written with pseudo prophecy, that came after was a preterist. So when I was a full preterist, I still believed in Jesus, and I believed that the Bible was accurate, and
Hmm.
that Jesus really did prophesy about the destruction of the temple before it happened.
Hmm.
But then I was like, as I continue, and when I started, I guess when I studied Philo, I was like, holy cow, this is Christianity before Christianity. And then when you see in history, there was no eyewitness to Jesus at all. Nobody. All the apostles are completely non-existent in the historical record.
Well, when you say in the historical record, what do you mean?
Anybody other than the religious text of the Bible.
We don't have historical records for 99% of people in history.
Well, Josephus and Philo are in particular
Right,
did
but
not
that's
say
only
anything
because
about any of these guys, and
that's only be, right, but they don't write about the majority of people in history either though.
Josephus writes about 1,000 people that nobody's ever heard of before.
Yeah, and there were a lot more than 1,000 people who lived at that point in time too.
Right, but he's telling significant stories, and if Jesus lived in the first century, Josephus would have considered him to be a significant character.
Well, I'm not sure if that's true. What I
If,
would
if,
do.
if a man sent from heaven who healed everybody of all their sicknesses and resurrected after a public execution, that would be a significant thing, especially if he was a Jew in Jerusalem.
That's not to say that Josephus would have believed any of that, because you can have a recognition of somebody without believing in any kind of miracle or supernatural
Well,
abilities
but
about the guy.
I mean, Josephus wrote about seeing chariots in the clouds in the 70 AD war. So, I mean, now that may have been added too, like other things. We don't know what's been manipulated, but
So then, how do you take Josephus as a credible source? Because it sounds like you're making an argument from silence.
so I believe if the Bible Jesus existed, Josephus would have mentioned him.
But how do you know that that would be a credible source though?
Well, I think all sources are suspect. Every
Okay.
source. You could Tacitus, Josephus,
Hmm.
CNN, Fox News.
Hmm.
Every single source is suspect because every source has a bias of some sort. All we can do is read things that we have and say, well, this could have been manipulated. Maybe Josephus didn't even write this because Josephus in Wars of the Jews writes about Ananus ben Ananus, who was the high priest during the 70 AD war.
Hmm.
His dad was a high priest. His dad's name was Ananus. He had 5 children, and
Right.
all 5 of his children were high priests. So Ananus ben Ananus was considered a good person in War of the Jews, but in the Josephus's Antiquity of the Jews, he was the most wicked person who ever was. He's the one who killed James, the Lord's brother, uh, and he only reigned as high priest for 3 months because or whoever was Caesar, ripped him of his authority because he was such a wicked person. He only reigned for 3 months. So it's two
So,
totally different people, but the same person.
so was all of that made up as well? Because if Jesus never existed, he certainly wouldn't have had a brother named James.
Uh, so I believe that portion in Antiquities chapter 20, Josephus probably wrote something about a guy named James. And he may have even been a guy named Jesus' brother, but the only thing that Christians had to do was say who was called the Christ. They added that part, who was called the Christ, and then that's why they copied from Josephus in the Bible and said that Jesus had a brother named James because they were looking at Josephus as their source
Well, do you
because
have any
Josephus talks about John the Baptist and he talks about uh,
do you have any evidence that manuscripts were written all after Josephus?
the scholarly consensus is that Mark is the earliest gospel and it was written after 70 AD.
Well, I know what the scholarly consensus is, but that doesn't. But the scholarly consensus is that Mark was still drawing from written documents himself, or
Josephus.
whoever wrote Mark.
Yeah,
No,
Josephus.
there was more than just Mark. There was a Q, there was Q, but then there was could
Well,
be M and L as
that's
well.
mythical. That's mythical suspect. No, no, that's what do they call it?
Well, it's speculation.
Yeah, so they say, well, there's no way Mark just made this stuff up, which means not even they don't even think that whoever wrote Mark was an eyewitness to anything. He was just copying it from somebody else's work.
Right, but even then, I still think that presents an issue um, for the mysticist argument because you still have Josephus talking about somebody who knew the Jesus.
There's a whole bunch of people named Jesus.
But what
And I
Jesus
believe
would have
Josephus was not talking about the biblical Jesus at all, because if you read that quote in chapter 20 of Antiquities, it says that Jesus was anointed, Jesus the son of Damnius was appointed as high priest. That's in the same context. So that's not Jesus of the Nazarene or the Jesus of Nazareth. That was Jesus the son of Damnius, who was a Levite who was appointed as high priest. It's a
and
totally different Jesus.
could Josephus, and I'm not saying this is true, but could it be the case that Josephus got his people mixed up and got it wrong?
Of course. But Josephus never talked about anybody of any name who healed everybody of all their diseases and resurrected from the dead. So
Yeah, well,
that guy didn't exist according to Josephus.
but there's a difference, and if you watch Bart Ehrman's debate with what's his name? You probably know his name. It's a
Mark
pretty famous mysticist,
Robert Price,
maybe. Yeah,
probably
yeah,
yeah.
from the Jesus seminar or something like that.
Well, I've seen
Not,
I've seen the debate between Bart Ehrman and Robert Price on
yeah, I
did
think that
Jesus
it's
exist.
kind of a more heavy set guy, white beard.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Looks like
and
Santa Claus.
and both of those are skeptics, and Bart Ehrman doesn't believe in the miracle Jesus or what the Christian
Right.
depiction of Jesus, but he's not a mysticist. And I think that debate showed the error in the mysticist argument.
I don't. I think Robert Price made Bart look like a fool.
Well, I don't think so. Well, at least the audience didn't think that. If you watch like the clip after the debate, pretty much everybody seem to think that Bart won. Not to say he did, but that's just what they seem
Well,
to think.
but even Bart's position is ridiculous because Bart is saying that Jesus absolutely was a being, but he absolutely didn't perform any miracles. That all the miracles are myths. But then his only source for Jesus is the Bible, and he's saying that the Bible is not credible. So he's taken half the Bible or part of the Bible and saying it's good, but the other part is bad.
Well, it's because
And that's
he has
crazy.
certain criteria that he's going by in terms of disassociation and things along those lines. Historical disassociation. Basically,
So
he's saying if it one of the criteria is if it's in the text and it's something that wouldn't be normal for the text to be in there, then it's probably true. And
so technically, Bart Ehrman would agree with me that the Jesus that you read about in the Bible did not exist. He thinks it's a different Jesus who was just a regular man.
right,
So
but he's not. He's still not on the side of mysticism, which is what you're arguing.
right. So I disagree with Bart saying that Jesus was a real person, but I agree with Bart that that the Jesus that you read about in the Bible did not exist. So I agree with Bart on some things, and I disagree with him on some things.
Yeah, but in terms of maybe like dating for the debate or anything like that, you can shoot me a message or something and let me know when would be best for you, and then maybe I can try to see what my schedule would looks like. I'm starting my fall semester coming up.
Well, what day is a Saturday? Do you think Saturday is the best day?
Saturday will probably be the best day. Yeah.
Like Saturday morning or Saturday evening or high noon?
Probably Saturday, towards Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. But it probably just won't be able to go too late because usually I have stuff to do on Sunday morning.
Well, and so I would say, I'm thinking 2 hours total.
We could do that. Depends on
So we go from 6 to 8 or something like that.
we could probably do that. Maybe do. You want to do 15-minute opening statements? Is that too short?
I think either 15 or 20. I mean, I think 30 minutes is too long. 15 or 20-minute opening, and at least save 30 minutes for questions at the end. So we've only got an hour and a half of debate.
Yeah. What we could do is because the majority, as you know, the majority of the debate happens in the cross-examination section, and so we could make that the longest portion if you wanted.
Yeah, and so that's the portion that I think that we would need to. I mean, we don't have to have that scripted or as far as planned out what questions, but
yeah,
I at least like the last debate I did, we didn't do a prep for the debate. And it was just completely off the fly, and I don't think my opponent even understood my position. He was just essentially preaching more of his message during the rebuttal or the cross examination. I'm like, you really should respond to what I said and not.
Yeah, which the rule that probably would have to be established for us would be during your portion of the cross-examination section, you're only allowed to ask questions, and then you're only allowed to answer questions, sufficiently, but you can't monologue.
Right.
And you can't preach either.
Yeah, and I don't know if I don't remember it exactly. I don't think he was preaching, but he was only asking questions that were pertaining to his mindset coming in. He was not responding to what I said. So I think for the audience, they expect people to actually use their brain and actually listen to what the other person said and ask a question related to what they said.
Right.
And
that's what cross-examination is supposed to do. You're supposed to ask questions and try to from your perspective, trying to find holes in their argument that they presented.
Right. And so I think that's why we would need to understand each other's position pretty well so that we ask relevant questions during the cross-examination.
Yeah, that's why I said I had an advantage because you have your position on paper and I don't.
Right. So let me ask you a couple questions now.
Okay, that's fine.
So, I mean, you're a Christian apologist, so I can assume I know the answer to a lot of these. I saw you on live the other day, and I heard you saying a bunch of stuff that I considered to be ridiculous, but it's the position you have to have as a Christian apologist. So you would say that the Jesus spoken of in the Gospels, that these are reliable accounts of the actual person. If the Bible says in Matthew chapter 4, let me just flip to it because I quote this one all the time. Matthew 4:22 or 24, news about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. So you would take that to be a reliable statement that he healed people of all those things, demon possessions and paralysis and all that. And he was so well known that people followed him from the entire region, from Syria to Jordan to Jerusalem and Judea. He was that popular.
There's a couple of different questions inherent in the question, but from a starting believing presupposition, then yes, I would.
Right. And so I use this argument a lot to say this is how I know Jesus didn't exist, because nobody knew about this guy contemporaneous with him. Philo should have known about this. Even though it doesn't say Alexandria, Philo traveled to Jerusalem, and he was a Jew, and he was a Jewish ambassador to Rome. Who was it? Claudius? I can't remember who it was. I think it was Claudius. No, it was Caligula, I think. Yeah, it's because Philo wrote a whole chapter, and it's titled on the embassy to Gaius, the embassy to Gaius or something, and Gaius is a reference to Caligula. Mm-hmm. So it was Caligula.
Well, that kind of assumes that, number one, Philo would have had access to information regarding Jesus at that time, as opposed to somebody saying that, oh, that's just something happening locally within a particular portion of that area of the world. Especially if he was a Jew, that could have just been somebody he regarded as somebody making a ruckus, or he could have gone to Jerusalem and not even been aware of some of the issues during that time. Especially if it's the case that it's before Jesus' public ministry, because Jesus' public ministry was only 3 years.
Well, I mean, that's what I always thought growing up, and I've never actually seen how the Bible says that. And I know some people have argued. In fact, Irenaeus was arguing against the Essenes or whoever, who said Jesus' ministry was only 1 year, 12 months.
Well, Irenaeus, though, was arguing from a view of the atonement called the recapitulation theory. It's the first doctrine from Irenaeus that held the claim of apostolic tradition. And the reason why he taught that Jesus had a longer ministry was because he thought that Jesus would have been more than 50 years of age when he died, because he had to reach that age to appeal to God on behalf of older men. And so he's making a theological claim as opposed to maybe a historical one.
Well, so I think Irenaeus was saying that I've read that, so I think that was part of it, that Jesus had to represent all ages of people. Mm-hmm. So I've seen that somewhere. Maybe Irenaeus talks about it, but maybe somebody else did. But I think the primary reason that Irenaeus thought that Jesus was almost 50, but not really over 50, was because of the one verse in the Bible that says, the Jew says, you're not yet, it's in John chapter 8, I guess, where he says, you're not yet 50 years old, and you've seen Abraham. So,
right, but that's just saying that all that the Jews are pointing out at that point in time is that Jesus was not an old man at that point, and so his claim of being able to see Abraham was sort of outlandish from their perspective, because he wasn't an old man. Not that he was approaching to be one.
Right, but it's impossible for Jesus to have been anything more than 30 years old, mid-30s, when he died, because according to the Bible, because the Bible says he was about 30 in the 15th year of Claudius when John the Baptist baptized him, and then if Pontius Pilate was the one who was in power when he was crucified, Pontius Pilate was out by 36. So he had to be between 30 and 36 at the most,
Right.
according to the Bible. And so Irenaeus missed that. Irenaeus thought he was 45 to 50.
Yeah, and Irenaeus was wrong on a number of different issues.
Right. So that's good to know that you are willing to say that, because
I can let the early church fathers be who they were. I don't have to force them into being a Baptist or a Roman Catholic or a Greek Orthodox like other people have to.
Well, but you would have to answer what Jesus said when he left. He would send the Holy Spirit to guide them into all truth. And we've got in the Bible, we've got Peter and Paul fighting, Paul rebuking him to his face in Galatians chapter 2. We've got James and Paul fighting about circumcision in Acts chapter 15. We've got people in 1 John saying that the Antichrist is the ones who say Jesus didn't even come in the flesh. So there was all this confusion in the most early writings, even in our own Bible, that there was no spirit of truth that anybody agreed to anything.
Well, there was a spirit of truth, because if you continue reading in Acts, you have the Jerusalem Council where the disciples come to an agreement on one accord. And then later on in Peter's writing, he actually upholds Paul's teaching. It says that Paul was teaching the truth. And so they came to an understanding at that point in time. But of course, the Spirit of God is to those who believe in him. And the charge in 1 John is against those who do not have the Spirit of truth and are not believers. And the reason why they're not believers is because they make claims like Jesus didn't come in the flesh. That's why you have a lot of different Christological heresies popping up in the first century, like Nestorianism, Eutychianism, Apollinarianism, Arianism, what have you.
Right. So I would make that argument too, that Irenaeus and Polycarp and all these church fathers, they act like they know what is the absolute truth, and anybody who was teaching different, and there were people that were teaching different, they call them heretics, but yet they were not eyewitnesses to anything. And so what makes them authority figures in this deal when they didn't see it? Why are they arguing with people and nobody's ever seen anything? They're just arguing over a book they read or something.
Well, I'm not sure. I don't make them necessarily an authority. I think that the church fathers ought to be considered, and you can draw certain streams of thought at that point in time. But I would be very, very cautious of anybody who said all the church fathers believe this or all of them didn't believe that. That's just simply not the case.
Or that there was any spirit of truth, because in Luke chapter 1, Luke, whoever wrote Luke, I don't think anybody named Luke wrote it, but whoever wrote Luke says, I have carefully investigated all these things, and I wanted you to tell you, O excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things that you have been taught. So he's like, so then Luke goes on in Luke chapter 3 to give a genealogy of Jesus, and it's different than the genealogy Matthew gives. So which one is right? Luke says, I'm telling you the truth. What I'm telling you is right. But yet Matthew tells us something different. So who's telling the truth?
Well, there's different ways of answering that. Of course, I'm sure you've heard different perspectives on which line of lineage Luke is writing to, as opposed to Matthew. He's writing to a very Jewish audience, and so he would have a different viewpoint as coming from maybe David as opposed to coming from Adam or something like that, or even establishing the lineage of Mary as opposed to Joseph, which I'm not sure if I buy that fully, but...
Well, right. So the most common argument that I hear is that one of them is Mary and one of them is Joseph. But both of them expressly say they are the genealogy of Joseph. And Luke is even adamant. He says over and over that Joseph was of the house of David. But, the reason they were going to Bethlehem was because Joseph was of the house of David, and Mary was just going with Joseph because she was betrothed to him, and he was of the house of David. So Luke is very adamant that he's talking about Joseph. And that would mean, well, technically, Matthew is also just as, maybe not just as adamant, because I don't think he says Joseph was of the house of David like 4 or 5 times, but he mentions Joseph. And, the difference between the genealogy is after David, they're completely different, because Matthew goes through Solomon, David's son Solomon. Luke goes through Nathan, David's other son. So they're completely different after David, all the way to Jesus. So
I mean, there's still a possibility though that one is recognizing Matthew is recognizing more of a Jewish understanding of a genealogy, whereas Luke is appealing to more of a Gentile understanding of a genealogy.
well, so I would argue that Matthew is not Jewish at all. Matthew is the furthest thing from Jewish of anything in the entire Bible, because Matthew, more than any other book, molests the Hebrew Scriptures, saying that Hosea 11:1 was about Jesus going to Egypt, and that Jeremiah 31 was about the children crying out, Rachel's children crying out when Herod was, the infanticide. He was molesting the Hebrew Scriptures. So any Jew, any good Jew, would have utterly despised Matthew, because he's claiming, in fact, the virgin birth. He says Isaiah 7:14 is about Jesus. Any good Jew would say this is ridiculous. This is not what Isaiah 7:14 is about. So Matthew is making a mockery of the Hebrew Scriptures. That's my position.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily true, and the reason why is because Jews have recognized for a long, long time that prophecy within the Hebrew Scriptures had an immediate fulfillment, an immediate historical one, but then they most often had a larger, greater fulfillment later on at some point in time. And so and also from Matthew's point of view, at least, as I see it, Matthew is writing after certain things have happened in time and history, which would allow for a progressive revelation to shed light upon the places to where the Old Testament would have foreshadowed or have been a type of the Messiah, the one to come. And so, I mean,
well, so I've asked Jews, and I've specifically watched videos about Rabbi Tovia Singer, because when I was going through my process of asking this question, because in 1 Corinthians 15 verses 3 and 4, Paul says, according to the Scriptures, Jesus had to die and be buried and resurrected in 3 days. I'm like, well, what Scripture is that? I talk about that in the book. You've probably read it.
right.
And I'm like, it's not there. There is no prophecy about Jesus dying and being resurrected 3 days later. And so you have to piecemeal it from a little bit here, a little bit there, and you take everything out of context and you apply it to Jesus, which is what the entire New Testament has always done. But I was asking myself, me and Vanilla, who's my study partner, we were saying, well, what if you asked the Jew, because Vanilla even went on TikTok lives with some Jews and asked them this stuff, like, where's the prophecy for their future Messiah? And they start him-hoeing around, and actually, I remember a video of Tovia Singer laughing at the idea. There is no concept of a future Messiah. Every generation expects a Messiah to save them from their hardships. If things are not going well, if they have an oppressor, or if they're in slavery or whatever, if they're not able to freely worship the way they want to, then they are looking for a Messiah to come restore them back to where they want to be. It's like every generation. It's not one future Messiah to fix all things. So,
Well, I mean, the Singer has some pretty interesting views, but I think a very interesting example of a Jew who has not held the belief of Jews in the past. I'm not saying there weren't Jews that held his position, but certainly there have been many, many Jews who do not hold to that position, and certainly many Jews today who don't hold to that position, including Messianic Jews. Like, I'm sure you're aware, Dr. Michael Brown has some very strong arguments against the arguments that Singer proposes.
So yeah, I've seen some debates with Michael Brown, Dr. Brown, and he seemed like a nice guy. I like the guy. In fact, I remember he's the guy that taught me the fallacy of 1 John 5:7, because I think he was debating somebody, and I guess he's a Trinitarian.
Yeah, he is.
And so whenever somebody brought up 1 John 5:7, he says, no, we can't use that verse. That is an unreliable verse. I won't even argue it in a debate. So I'm like, well, hey, I respect that. So I think of Dr. Brown every time somebody brings up 1 John 5:7.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of the major textual variants in the New Testament. It's been known for quite a long time now, and it's not actually a proof text for anything or a proof text against any major doctrine, including the Trinity. So,
Well, I think it does. I think it is a proof text against the Trinity.
I
I don't
don't,
think it teaches Trinity. Even if it was an authentic verse, it doesn't teach Trinity.
well, even from a theological standpoint, even from a non-mystic standpoint, though, you would attribute Jesus to be just a pagan mythology anyway, in terms of a demigod.
Well, sure, but if we're debating Trinity, I think First John 5:7 is. I'm not afraid to talk about it. I enjoy talking about it. To be honest, about First John 5:7.
I've written entire academic papers on the doctrine of the Trinity. I mean, since I'm 20 plus papers on the doctrine of the Trinity, didn't even mention 1 John 5:7 once.
Well, that's good. You should.
So
You
I
should.
mean,
Well, you should have at least mentioned it and said it was not an authentic verse. That somebody added this in the 14th century. You should have at least mentioned it.
well, I mean that was what I was trying to demonstrate is that I didn't need to utilize that verse in order to demonstrate. And another thing I didn't do was I didn't appeal to the Council of Nicaea either.
You mean so the Council of Nicaea had nothing to do with Trinity. It just said that Jesus was God, right?
Well, it had to do with Jesus being of the same essence of the Father, which I mean, and you have Trinitarian language being utilized by that time for sure by people like Tertullian and some other church fathers that attended Nicaea,
Right.
and
So
Ignatius as well.
so was any of the church fathers a Jew, a Hebrew?
Um, by ethnicity or by belief?
Either.
I mean, I'm sure there were. I don't have infallible knowledge of every church father off the top of my
Well,
head right now. I'd have
so
to look
so
it up.
I have said that none of them are Jews, and I don't know that for a fact, but I believe that none of them were Jews. They were all Greeks. They all spoke Greek. They read Greek. They studied Greek. They so these people now, and they were from Syria and Leon and
Well,
all over
there
the
were
world.
there were very few church fathers who could could read both Greek and Hebrew. There was only a couple of them. Jerome was one of them. Jerome could read Hebrew and Greek. I think Origen was another one who could read both Hebrew and Greek and could understand the concepts of the Old Testament and in its original context and things along those lines.
Well,
Which is
well, but
why I rejected deuterocanonical texts. But
uh, but most of the people, well, I mean, even Papias's quote saying that Matthew wrote some of the Lord's saying in the Hebrew tongue, and we did the best we could to interpret it. So he's indicating that they had a hard time interpreting anything in Hebrew. But when I found this was another epiphany for me when I realized that there's a difference between the Septuagint and the Hebrew scriptures, and that the New Testament almost always quotes the Septuagint instead of the Hebrew scriptures.
mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, especially in like Luke chapter 4, when Jesus grabs the scroll of Isaiah and he reads, and says, "Today this has been fulfilled in your hearing." Reads, it's a quote from Isaiah 61. There's a significant difference between the Septuagint and the Hebrew scripture there, and I do not think, even when I first realized this, I did not think that it sounded right for Jesus to be reading from the Septuagint. So I'm saying this is what taught me that whoever wrote the New Testament, they were not Hebrews at all. Hebrew was a foreign language to them. They didn't understand it. They didn't read it. They only read Greek. That's why they only quoted the Septuagint.
Well, there are
So,
certain portions in the New Testament that have Aramaic in it as well, though.
yeah, very, very few.
But Aramaic, if you are understanding Aramaic at that point in time, you most likely would have had to understand Hebrew because Aramaic is a cognate of Hebrew.
Right, but it's very scanty. Like when they said Jesus said Eli Eli lama sabachthani on the cross, so that's supposed to be Aramaic, right? And when he resurrected the little girl, he said Talitha Komi, little girl rise. And so as far as I know, that's the only Aramaic in the whole New Testament.
Right, but even then, from your position, whoever wrote that had to have some sort of background into what was being said and understanding the language, unless he was just copying blindly from
Well,
something.
right. So he could have been copying uh, from the Q source, these hypothetical sources,
But there's no way to demonstrate that, though.
Right. So what we can demonstrate is that everything we have of all biblical text and manuscripts is that it was Greek.
Well,
Greek is the language of the New Testament.
Well, why is that the case, though? What happened a few hundred years earlier that would cause a widespread culture of a Hellenistic culture to be in power at that time? You had Alexander the Great and the Pax Romana. That's why everything was Greek at that point in time.
Yeah, but even the Bible says that that the Jews in Jerusalem were speaking Hebrew, or Greek, or Aramaic, or not Greek, but Aramaic, because when Paul in Acts was arrested, he was actually saved from the Jews at the temple in that, like Acts 22 or 23. The Jews were going to riot and stone him or something. And then the Roman soldiers came and rescued Paul. And while Paul was standing on the steps to the fortress, he asked for permission to turn around and speak to the Jews. And the Roman soldiers said, "Do you speak Greek or do you speak Aramaic?" So he said, "Do you speak Greek?" Because the Roman only spoke Greek. And he says, and then he speaks to him in Greek, and he says, "Of course I do." And then he turns around and he speaks to the Jews in Aramaic. Because so if the Bible is true, then you have to say the main language, that there was a language barrier between the Romans and the Jews in the first century in Jerusalem, because Acts says that the Romans and the Jews couldn't communicate.
Well, where does it say that they couldn't communicate?
Well, right in Acts chapter 23, when Paul addressed the Jewish crowd in the Aramaic tongue, because he had to, because they didn't speak Greek.
Well, what I think Paul was doing was he was demonstrating that he was a kinsman, because to both the Roman centurion and to the people at that time, because if you remember, Paul was a special case because he had Roman citizenship. Maybe his parents were brought into slavery, and then he had been granted citizenship from birth at that point in time, or whatever. But he was also a Jew from the line of Benjamin, and he studied under Gamaliel.
And somebody told me I need to look at that, because somebody told me that that's impossible. That the timing of that Gamaliel could never have met Paul due to the timing of his death and all that. So I need to look in that. Somebody made a claim and I hadn't verified it.
So you said Acts 23?
Yeah, it is. It's Acts 21. I've got it pulled up. I found it. Acts 21. Verse 37 says, "As the soldiers were about to take Paul into the barracks, he asked the commander, 'May I say something to you?' He said, 'Do you speak Greek?'" So that's an indication that the commander only spoke Greek. He's like, "If you want to talk to me, you got to speak Greek." "Do you speak Greek?" he replied. "Aren't you the Egyptian who started a revolt and led 4,000 terrorists out into the wilderness some time ago?" Paul answered, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no ordinary city. Please let me speak to the people." So apparently he's speaking Greek right there, because he's communicating with the Roman soldier, the commander. After receiving the commander's permission, Paul stood on the steps and motioned to the crowd. All silent, he said to them in Aramaic, possibly Hebrew.
Yeah, the translation I have says Hebrew.
Right, so I've got an NIV, but it's got a footnote that says possibly Hebrew.
Yeah, Hebrew or Aramaic.
It's in their tongue, so it just indicates that the Romans spoke Greek and that the Jews spoke the Hebrew tongue.
Right, but my position is not that they couldn't understand Greek, or that the Jews at that point in time didn't have any way to communicate. Well, Paul's intention was to speak to the Roman soldier, demonstrating that he was a Roman citizen and trying to appeal to his people as a Hebrew, because he mentioned he was a Jew from Tarsus. So he was trying to appeal to both parties by speaking in the original tongue, not to say that they couldn't understand Greek.
Not that the Jews couldn't understand Greek. So
Yeah, because look at what he says. He goes, "I am a Jew." He's telling them about his background and why they can trust him.
So I would assume that, I mean, Greek was the common language of the day, and even now, I guess the Hebrews were trying to maintain their culture, and the Bible also in the book of Acts talks about a conflict between the Jews and the Hellenistic Jews. So,
Mm-hmm.
so in the Bible there was this desire for the Hebrews to stay Hebrew, and not to give in to the pressure to become Hellenized, and so.
In terms of culture, yes, but it also, I mean, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they couldn't understand at least some of the language just for practical usage.
Sure,
Just because
sure.
if a angry Roman centurion is yelling at you in the middle of the street, it would be helpful to know what he's having to say.
Yeah, and of course, I would assume that they would at least have some capability of understanding Greek,
Mm-hmm.
but it would not be their desired language because they're trying to maintain their culture.
Right. What Paul is doing is he's trying to demonstrate to the Jews that he himself is a Jew by speaking to them in a tongue that no native Greek speaker would be able to do at that point in time, unless they were actually a Jew and actually a rabbi.
Right. I suspect, and I can't prove this, but I suspect that Paul is a fictitious character also, and well, because so who wrote about Paul outside of the Bible? Who? Nobody. Josephus didn't write about him. Nobody
Peter
did.
wrote about him.
Peter couldn't even write. Peter didn't write anything.
Well, I mean,
And
that doesn't necessarily mean that Peter didn't use an amanuensis.
so, do you think Peter wrote First and Second Peter?
I think he wrote yes, but I don't think he wrote through the same person.
Yeah, I think I can demonstrate that Peter didn't write or dictate or have anything to do with First or Second Peter.
I'm not sure how you would do that.
Well, I did it in my. I at least danced around it a little bit in my book. If chapter whatever on the authorship when you get to Peter.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I've gone to that specific chapter yet. The reason why I'm working through it very slowly because I'm taking notes as I'm going, so I'm not just speed reading. I'm trying to do my due diligence and take the time to understand what you're trying to say.
Because I can't remember what I'm talking about, but I've got it right here. So, there's the Pauline letters. It's pretty short. So let me see: Hebrews, James, Petrine letters. It's pretty short. Let me read it. 1 Peter 1:1, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the chosen ones who are living as foreigners in the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. 2 Peter 1:1, Simon Peter, a servant and apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who have obtained a like precious faith with us in the righteousness of our Savior Jesus Christ. Whoever wrote the Petrine epistles was certainly claiming to be the apostle Peter and an eyewitness testimony. 1 Peter 5:1. Therefore I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the suffering of Christ, and who will also share in the glory that will be revealed. If Peter actually wrote these epistles, he would have had to write them before his traditional death in the 60s, yet after Paul wrote his letters, because 2 Peter 3, even as our beloved brother Paul also, according to the wisdom given to him, wrote to you, as also in all of his letters, speaking in them of these things. So in 2 Peter, Peter is making a reference to Paul's letters. So he had to write after Paul wrote. Not only that,
Paul is thought to write very, very early, though, within at least 10 years of Jesus' death.
Well, I would say in the 50s, in 60s is when Paul was supposed to be making his missionary journeys to all those places.
But that doesn't mean that he wasn't necessarily writing before that time too. And he utilizes things like, if you read Philippians chapter 2, the Carmen Christi was an early hymn that had been circulating in the church for quite some time at the time before, and existed before the writing of Philippians. And so the sources that Paul was utilizing from as he was writing are very, very early.
Well, I would say that the Pauline letters are considered to have been written in the 50s and 60s.
One thing that I noticed too, and maybe I just haven't gotten to a point in the book where it has this, but I didn't see any footnotes or anything in your book. Do you have any?
No, so I didn't. I tried to incorporate my references in the text instead of just having a bunch of, because it gets complicated when you have to flip pages and make references. So I put my references, the script. And if I quote Josephus, I would put the chapter and verse of Tacitus or Josephus in the text. So it was just going to be complicated for me to, make a reference page or whatever.
Well, that's why I said that, maybe it wasn't your intention to do this, obviously, but that's why I made the comment that it didn't seem to be scholarly in nature, because that's typically how scholarly works, right? Is they have footnotes and you can have in-text citations, but typically they'll have a footnote and then a bibliography in the back or something along those lines.
Yeah. So this is just me. This is a layman writing. So I'm not trying to pretend to be a scholar. I'm just writing because I think what I'm doing, I believe that laymen can understand my book better than a scholarly book, because scholars write over people's heads, and they try to sound smart, but then they're not relating to their audience. So I wrote this with intention of laymen being able to understand it and not confuse them. Let me finish this Petrine thing, the Peter Gospel, Peter epistles. Not only that, so we know that Peter had to write after, or whoever wrote Peter wrote after Paul, and he supposedly died in the 60s because nobody ever saw this guy. So not only that, he would have had to have been highly educated in the Greek culture and in the Greek Septuagint, yet he was supposed to be an uneducated Hebrew fisherman. So Peter, the epistles of Peter, make some elaborate references to the Greek Septuagint, not the Hebrew. So this was an uneducated Hebrew, a fisherman. So if he could not have even dictated this unless he had a miraculous knowledge given to him that he wouldn't have had otherwise. So even if he was dictating and the scribe was writing the stuff down, the scribe would have had been highly educated in Greek, and he would not have been writing what Peter told him. He would have been interjecting his own Greek knowledge into the text, because these Petrine epistles are considered to be highly sophisticated Greek writing.
Well, again, in that point in time in history, you have the norm of people speaking in Greek at times to do common trade and things along those lines. So obviously Peter, being a fisherman, if he had any kind of trade business going on with people from the outside of Galilee, then he would have known Greek and would have been able to speak it just to trade with people.
But that's different than being highly educated and trained and sophisticated in referencing the Greek Septuagint.
Not necessarily,
if Peter, as a fisherman, had some ability to communicate for the purposes of trade in Greek, that is different than being highly educated and sophisticated in Greek.
Well, but there's a difference between being highly sophisticated in terms of knowing what the Greek Septuagint says, because it had been around for about 200 years at that point, and the majority of quotations that people would have been utilizing at that point, especially from Hellenistic Jews, would have been from the Greek Septuagint. And in addition to that, just because there are certain elaborations in writing, that's still just all that points to is that Peter could have been using an amanuensis.
You're breaking up real bad.
It must be a connection thing.
Somebody in the comments, is that just him breaking up, or is it me?
You're not breaking up on my end.
Oh. Well, you're breaking up real bad for me. I can't hear. Oh. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Is it still breaking up?
Yeah, so you're still breaking up. What is your name, so I can call you something other than apologist?
I don't want to dox myself on here, but I'll shoot you my name for the debate.
Well, nobody can stalk you based on a first name.
Yeah, but I
okay. If you don't want to give it, that's fine. But let me finish reading this about Peter. So Acts chapter 4, verse 13. Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and had perceived that they were unlearned and ignorant men, they marveled. So the book of Acts chapter 4 says Peter was unlearned and ignorant.
Well, the book of Acts.
Whoever wrote Peter was well educated in Greek.
Well, at that point in time,
But
though,
the Bible says that he was unlearned and ignorant.
unlearned and ignorant in what sense? Not in every sense, but if you notice what had happened at that point in time, which is what chapter was that from again? Was that chapter 2?
I can't hear you. Breaking up too bad.
Was that from Acts chapter 2?
Breaking up. Let me keep reading. I'm almost done. It's just a little short section.
Well,
there is the remote possibility that God miraculously gave Peter the ability. Hold up a second. You're breaking up so bad. Vanilla says I'm good. So let me finish reading this little section on Peter, just in case somebody was interested.
Can you hear me now?
I heard that.
Okay. Well, what I was going to say, what I was asking was apart the text about Peter being an unlearned individual. Is that in Acts 2? I'm trying to find it.
Acts chapter 4, verse 13.
Acts 4. Okay, that's one.
See, that's the good thing about not having. I've got my references right there in the text, so it says it, boom, right there, Acts 4:13. See, I didn't want people flipping pages or having to go to their Bible. Like, if they want to go to their Bible, they can and verify that I'm quoting it correctly. But I wanted people to just be able to read top to bottom without bouncing all over the place and saying, I don't know if this is true, because that's what a lot of people do. A lot of people just expect you to believe what they're saying, and then they make it complicated to verify it. I don't want it to be complicated. I want it to be very simple and straightforward. So let me finish this. There is the remote possibility that God miraculously gave Peter the ability to write sophisticated Greek, but then God had to also prevent Peter's ability to escape his executioners in the 60s. There is also the possibility that Peter dictated his message to a scribe, but this would have also required a miraculous Greek education for Peter to dictate such a Greek sophisticated message. 1 Peter 5:12, through Silvanus, our faithful brother, as I consider him, I have written to you briefly, exhorting and testifying that this is the true grace of God in which you stand. Last little paragraph. I consider the Greek influence to be highly significant. The Christian message is supposed to be a message originating from mostly poor, uneducated Hebrews, yet in actuality it is a highly educated and cultured Greek message. With this being said, most scholars today conclude that Peter was not the author of these epistles, and that the author of 2 Peter was not the same author as 1 Peter. Estimates for the date of writing these two epistles range from 60 to 112 CE. This puts the Christian in an awkward position of either blindly believing, I misspelled that, blindly believing the claims, or admitting that the Holy Scriptures are not so holy.
Well,
that's my section.
So my discrepancy, as I was talking about before, with when you have claims like that, when you say, well, scholars say this, or you list dates for stuff like that, those are where I'm looking for, okay, well, where are you getting that information from? Because you don't quote anything for those kinds of claims.
Right. So, I probably should go back and add that in here, because I was getting this from a website called Early Christian Writings, I think it's called, Early Christian Writings, and it's got everything, so you can go to one place and you can pull up Polycarp or Justin Martyr or anything, because it's all right there in one spot. earlychristianwritings.com or something like that.
Yeah, but just from reading that from the book, though, I had no idea.
Okay, right. So yeah, I probably should put that in here, because I don't think I mentioned that I was looking at early Christian writings, and so that's not even in, whenever you look up Peter, it's essentially like when some Bibles will have an introduction to the books, and they will say, give the background and history and authorship of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so essentially that website, when you pull up 1st and 2nd Peter, it has an introductory section where it tells some background as to what the scholarly consensus is to it, and that's where I got that information from. So
yeah. And the majority of New Testament scholars, though, just for people who aren't aware, the majority of New Testament scholars aren't practicing Christians in many cases. And so they're going to have a lot of conclusions that maybe a believing scholar wouldn't, and for various reasons, obviously.
Well, and so that's apparent and significant. So if you say most New Testament scholars are not believers, that means the people who are the smartest and most educated and who are studying this stuff in the most in-depth detail don't even believe it's true.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not true, though. Just because you have smart people on both sides who some claim it's true, some claim it's not true. I mean, that's you have that with the majority of either religions or things that people disagree upon.
Well,
just because you have smart
so
people
right, so
on both sides doesn't mean it's
but
true.
the evidence. So that means no matter how much you dig and study, the evidence will never be compelling. You just have to decide whether you want to believe it or not.
Well, the issue
evidence
is for every article that somebody writes, there's somebody who writes an article against it, and they might, everybody has a PhD in this or a PhD in that, and so you really have to vet the sources and vet their sources, and like you said, kind of choose based upon the arguments what you want to go with, and that is heavily dependent upon one's own presuppositions that they're coming with.
Correct. And so. And that's what I've done. I would watch debates. I would read different perspectives. I was a Christian. I did believe the stuff. When I read the perspectives of the people who said that this is not true and gave their reasons why, I'm like, my goodness, that's more compelling than just believing. Especially, it's impossible to believe that the Bible is infallible. It's impossible unless you're just completely, blind and just say, I believe blindly. And if it looks like like the genealogy between Matthew and Luke, to say that's not a contradiction is really dishonest, because it is. I mean, it's not even debatable.
Well, not necessarily, because there have been answers that have been provided down throughout history. Now, some of them are better than others, but one that I came across maybe, I don't know, a few years ago when I was challenged with this argument was that one genealogy is coming from a royal or maybe even a legal genealogy, as opposed to the other one is coming from a physical genealogy.
Yeah, but how could that be different?
Well, it's different because you have a legal genealogy linking directly from the line of David in terms of the kinghood, as opposed to the physical line from David.
So you're saying Jesus was adopted, right? So Joseph wasn't his biological daddy, he was his legal daddy.
No. I'm saying from Joseph, there is a tie to David, but there could have been a tie physically through, who was it? Through David's son. There could have been a tie legally through Solomon, but there could have been another tie through Nathan, physically. And the reason why is because the understanding of the kingship, the passing down of the kingship and hence the priesthood was given through Solomon. And so the argument from one of the Gospels could be that there's a royal genealogy coming through Solomon, but then there's also a physical genealogy going through Nathan.
So explain. I got distracted in the middle of that. So how is it possible that Jesus could have two different genealogies, one from Nathan and one from Solomon?
Because Matthew could be listing the official line of Davidic kings, not Jesus' actual maybe physical ancestors. And his point is to show that Joseph is related to the line of kings from David, whereas Luke could be actually referencing the physical descendants from David. In other words, the genealogy that we're accustomed to when we think about it.
So that doesn't make sense. Matthew chapter 1 verse 1 says, this is the genealogy of Jesus. That's the first words of Matthew. Mm-hmm. The Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And it goes through all the names. It goes Abraham, blah, blah, Solomon, Rehoboam, blah, blah, blah. And then verse 16 says, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. So it's saying this guy was the son of this guy, was the son of this guy, or this one's not saying son of, this is saying the father of. So he's saying Akim was the father of Eliud, Eliud was the father of Eleazar, Eleazar the father of Mathan, Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph. There we go. And who was the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus. So this is, it starts out, this is the genealogy of Jesus.
And my point is that one genealogy could be a theological pointing towards David as opposed to the other one, which would just be a more typical physical one.
Well, why would anybody ever do that? Genealogy was all about bloodline. It's not about some mystical relationship that had no blood point to make. The only reason to ever give a genealogy is to say that this is bloodline, because prophecies were about, the son of David, the descendant of David.
Unless there's a deeper theological reason that Matthew is trying to flesh out there. I'm just saying that could be one of the could be an answer to that.
Well, it makes no sense to me. Genealogy means father and son. Like, you have sex and they have a son, and this is my blood. So you wouldn't even list a genealogy for someone who was adopted if you're trying to make the point that this is the blood fulfillment of prophecy, which is the point for giving Jesus' genealogy, to say that he is the fulfillment of the seed of Abraham and the seed of Judah and David.
Right,
That's
but there's
the only reason.
But there's also if you read the Jew, there were two lines of thought in Judaism concerning the Messiah. One was a physical king, but the other one was a savior that was supposed to be coming from an eternal presence after the order of Melchizedek, which is why you have questions in places like Psalm 110:1, where the descendant of David is called Lord by David.
No, so I take the position that Jesus does not understand the Old Testament scriptures in Psalm 110:1, because it has a title and it has the Hebrew letter lamed that it says a psalm unto David, not a psalm written by David, because the Hebrew letter lamed is in front of David and it means unto. And that same inseparable preposition is in next to Adonai or Adon in that verse. So it says this is a psalm unto David, and it says Yahweh said unto Adonai, and David is called Adonai, and David is called the one who sits at the right hand until he's made his enemies his footstool. So Psalm 110 is about Jesus, and Jesus misquoted in Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Yeah, well, the Lamed, have you taken any Hebrew classes in terms of knowing? Okay, so and it's not your fault. You probably don't know this, but the grammatical phraseology in Hebrew, with the inseparable Lamed there, that's the way that Hebrew reads to show ownership. So when it says that that Adam had a wife, basically what it would read was, to Adam there was a woman. That's the Jewish or the Hebraic way of just showing ownership.
Well, so what I did, so I didn't take a class, but I have seen a Hebrew instruction manual where it says whenever lamed is in front of a word, it is a inseparable preposition and it means unto.
Yeah, it does, but there is certain phraseology. It's operating syntactically in a certain fashion when you have a subject in relation to an object. So an inseparable preposition is just, you still have other parts of the phrase. You have an object that is, or you have a subject, and then you have verbs, and they could be acting accusatively, or they could be acting substantively, or anything along those lines. But my point is that in the construct, in the phrase there, the inseparable preposition, the lamed, is just showing ownership. If you read, in fact, I could give you a reference for that. If you read Exegesis to Exposition by Dr. Dr. Robert Chisholm.
So let's talk. Let me talk about this thing. So I don't know. I'm not going to check out these resources right now. Maybe another time. But let's turn to Psalm 110, verse 1. It says, so the NIV that I have says, of David, a psalm. It says of David first, then a period, then a psalm. And it says the Lord, so it's all capital L, and I know it means Yahweh. Right. So it doesn't say the. There is no definite what do they call it? Definite article there. It's just Yahweh.
The reason why there's a definite article is because proper names in Hebrew will receive a definite article, whether it's physically there or not. When you translate into English, it would be the.
But the Hebrew text just says Yahweh.
Right, but the proper English translation would be the, because Yahweh is a definite name, and so definite names take an article in English, and that's why the Greek puts a ha kurios instead of just kurios.
So anytime it talks about Moses or anything else, it would say the Moses.
It depends on the context, but typically, it would be translated of the something or the
Okay,
person,
so
and at some points it does have an article, because
I don't
because
think
the subject,
it ever no Bible ever says the Moses.
no, not when you translate it into English, but when you have verbs and you have subjects in Hebrew, they have to agree in gender, number, and definiteness. And so when you have a proper name, then the verbs and everything around it have to remain definite, and which would take an article. So the Lord says, but it would just say says Yahweh.
Okay, so that's kind of irrelevant to this point anyway.
Yeah.
So it says Yahweh says to my Lord. So it's showing ownership, and the only reason that you would assume that this is talking about someone other than David is if you have to conclude that David is the one that's writing it. So if David is writing it, then you say, if Yahweh says to my Lord, who is David's Lord? Because David's Lord was Yahweh. David did not have another Lord. David is adamant that his only Lord was Yahweh. So the Greeks and Jesus took it out of context, changed the meaning, and added another Lord in there because that's what they were trying to do. They were deliberately trying to create another Lord, when the original intent of Psalm 110 is simply to say that this is someone else writing a psalm unto David and saying, Yahweh told my Lord David. So the Adonai there is David, and David is called Adonai many times in the scriptures. And it even specifically says, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. And I can't remember the verse now, but it's in Kings. It's either 1 Kings 5.
Well, there's two issues with that. The first issue is that there's actually no evidence grammatically or contextually to say that this was somebody writing to David. And the second thing is
there is
where
grammatically.
where
The Lamed says unto David. It's not a psalm. I
already explained to you why that's not an issue.
Well, I disagree with you.
Well, then you just don't know Hebrew.
Well, I read a Hebrew instruction manual that said Lamed means unto.
Yeah, it does, but it's also, if you read, there's certain modes, there's modalities for certain things in Hebrew, certain verbs and certain prepositions, and when it says to David or unto David, there's a reason. That's a way of showing ownership, showing possession. There's no apostrophe s in Hebrew.
Right, so it's saying this is a psalm unto David. This is a psalm that I have written to glorify my Lord David.
No. There is no subject. There's no first person common singular subject in that phrase that would indicate that it's somebody writing to David. It just says le David. It just starts off with the Lamed is the first radical in the entire phrase.
So you think that necessarily means that David had to be the one who wrote it. It could not be someone else who wrote it to David. It had to be David writing it.
I'm saying two things. First thing is that there's nothing in grammatically in the text that demonstrates that somebody else is writing. And number two, the Lamed preposition is just demonstrating ownership.
Okay, so does the text, in your opinion, require David to be the author?
Does it require David to be the author? Yes, because there's nobody else mentioned in the context.
No. So I would say you're just being dishonest there.
How am I being dishonest? Can you prove that there's another person being mentioned?
If you cannot say that it is possible that someone else wrote this in honor of David, then I would say you're just being dishonest.
I'm saying there's nothing to indicate that there is, and from the context...
Okay, so equally with that same thing, you should be able to honestly say there is also nothing that requires it to be David is the author. You should be honest enough to say that.
Well, we know that David wrote a good majority of the Psalms, though.
No, you don't.
I'm sorry?
There is no way you can know that David wrote anything.
Okay, well, there's no way to know that there are cows jumping on the moon at 3:30 in the morning, but it's irrelevant to how we do history.
So you cannot say that you know David wrote anything.
Well, okay, that would come into that's an epistemological claim. That's not an evidence-based claim.
So I'm saying you should say we think that David wrote a lot of the Psalms.
The best evidence from the grammatical structure of the Hebrew, I'm looking at the Hebrew right now, is that David wrote it.
Okay, so I don't believe he did, because look, it says, "Sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool." If you turn to 1 Kings chapter 5, verse 3, it says, "You know that because of wars that waged against my father," so this is Solomon speaking about his father David, "wars waged against my father David from all sides, he could not build a temple for the name of the Lord his God until the Lord put the enemies under his feet." So there, I've got textual evidence that the Lord, Yahweh, put David's enemies under his feet. And when it says this is a psalm unto David, and you even said that it can mean unto, because you have to be at least honest enough to say that. And it says the Yahweh said unto my Adonai, "Sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool." And 1 Kings 5:3 says that God put all David's enemies under his feet.
Yeah, but that's kind of superimposing a context that's not derived from Psalm 110:1. You're more than welcome to try and draw a connection there, but you have to kind of stand on your.
Well, I've got more evidence than you. So who was David's Lord beside Yahweh?
Oh, that's the question, and that's the question that rabbis haven't.
But no. I can show you abundantly that David said Yahweh was his Lord. He had no other Lord except Yahweh.
Well, again, so there's
you're going to have to throw out 100 verses that I'm going to bring up saying that Yahweh was David's Lord for you to say that Psalm 110 is talking about some other Lord that was not Yahweh.
And unless it is the case, and this is what I was going to say earlier, unless it is the case that Adonai there is a commentary in the original writing of the psalm, what was Yahweh said to Yahweh, to my God.
Right, but so if David was writing this, then David, you're going to have, this is going to be an anomaly in the entire Bible. To say that David had a different Yahweh God than the Yahweh God. Because Yahweh says, "I am the only God. There is no other God besides me. There's none before me or after me or besides me."
And if you read people like, I think it's David Boyara and Steven Seagal, maybe not Steven, but somebody.
Steven Seagal, he's a
not
karate man.
Not the actor. There's another last name Seagal rabbi who wrote extensively on the two powers of heaven, and they're not Messianic Jews, they're Orthodox Jews. And there's a stream of tradition down through Jewish history, of having a two-power view, and that's why you read in places, I think it's in Genesis, you have Yahweh on earth raining fire and brimstone down from Yahweh in heaven. And so wouldn't it be an anomaly in that sense?
Well, so if I don't know if this would even come up in our debate. What is our debate? That Jesus is, well, no, it will. It will come up.
Title.
It will come up because I'm going to bring up where Jesus quoted this in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and say that Jesus is misapplying the Hebrew Scriptures. I'm bring up a bunch of stuff, say that a Jew would not take it this way. Now you could say, well, no, I know some Jews that do believe in the two-power system, but I know some Jews that don't. So, I mean, I can bring Tovia Singer in. He doesn't believe in two gods.
Well, no, it's not two gods. Two powers in heaven being, and that's fleshed out fully within. Especially if you consider the establishing in the New Testament that Jesus is Yahweh.
Well, Jesus didn't think that in the New Testament, so I can disprove that easily.
Sure, he did. That's why he quoted text specifically.
He said, "Father is greater than I." Yahweh never had a father, and there was nobody greater than Yahweh.
That assumes Unitarianism.
Yeah, which is what the Shema and what Paul, 1 Corinthians 8:6 says, there is one God, the Father of all, and there is one Lord, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and if you look at the Greek, Paul is actually expanding the Shema to include Jesus in the Echad, in the one God.
Right. So he's changing the Old Testament. So the Greeks who were writing in the Greek language after Greek philosophy, who were polytheists, we're saying, this one God thing that the Jews had, nah. We got more than one God. So that's why Greeks were
Well,
polytheists and they wrote the polytheistic New Testament.
no, because Paul was still demonstrably a monotheist. And that's what I was going to say before. There's a big difference between saying that God is monotheist and saying that he is Unitarianist. Meaning, you can say that there is one God, but to say that there is one God and one being in one person is a completely different claim.
So every time Trinitarians say this, it makes absolutely no sense to me. I am one person, and you can say I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a husband, I am a man, I'm an employee, but that does not make me a 7 different people or persons. I am the same person with different titles, and I never talk to myself and say, "Husband, would you go tell father that?" So that's illogical.
Yeah, no, that's not what my argument is. That was sort of a straw man. That's a modalistic concept of the Trinity. That's not what I argue for.
So all Trinitarians have to say that there is only one God.
Yes, that's the basis of the Trinity.
And that one God talks to himself as if he's a person.
See, you're assuming Unitarianism. The Father is not the Son is not the Spirit. They are distinct, but they share the one being of God. We make a distinction between the term being and person.
That's polytheism.
No, because they share the one nature, the one being of God.
That is illogical. That makes absolutely no sense. How can 3 different people be the same person?
No. I'm not saying they're the same person. I make a distinction between the
So then there are 3 different gods, then that's polytheism.
No, there's one being of God presented in Scripture in 3 distinct, co-equal, co-eternal persons, namely the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Well, Jesus was not co-equal or co-eternal because he said, "My Father is greater than I," and Jesus died. So he's not co-eternal because he died.
Well, no, that doesn't mean he ceased to exist. And secondly, Jesus in his incarnation said that the Father was greater than him positionally, and that the Father was not the one coming down, walking the dusty roads of Galilee and getting threatened to get killed everywhere he went. So positionally, the Father was greater. But that's because Jesus voluntarily chose in eternity past to accept the role of the Son and coming down and redeeming a particular people as the incarnate Word of God. That's what
so which son? Which son has ever been eternal? All sons who have fathers are not eternal beings.
Well, this Son is a title. It's not a claim to his ontology. It's just a way of distinguishing him.
That's convenient. That's convenient. When Jesus calls himself the Son, you say, "Well, he's just kidding. He don't mean son. He was never born." Yet, what is it? Colossians 1:15 says he is the firstborn of all creation. If you're born,
what does prototokon mean? What does prototokon mean?
Tell me.
Prototokon often gets translated as firstborn, but in the context, the semantic domain of prototokon is referring to his preeminence, his sovereignty over creation, which is why in the very next verse, Paul says that he created everything in heaven and on earth, whether invisible or visible, thrones, dominions, and it gives a pretty exhaustive list.
Right. Everything except himself, because I could use 1 Corinthians 15:28 to say that, because it says when all things are put under his feet. Of course, of necessity, that means all things except for the Father, because the Father is the one who put all things under him. So I can make the case that even if Jesus did create everything of necessity, that means everything except himself, because he had to be created first. Because that's also what monogenes means, the only begotten Son.
Yeah,
it means the only born Son.
No, monogenes is actually coming from 2
derivatives,
which means
mono and genomai,
which is stemming from unique, one of a kind.
And genomai means to be born or to come into existence.
It's coming from unique, one of a kind, not to be born.
No, genomai actually does mean to be born.
Well, have you read people like Dan Wallace's argument on this?
I don't care what anybody's argument is. I've looked up the definition and I've looked up the use of the word, and it means to come into existence.
Sir, no Greek scholar, I think, would agree with you that monogenes at that point in John 1 is referring to a literal creation.
I don't. Then I disagree with every scholar. But I bet you,
But you don't
I
even
can
know
find a
Greek. You
scholar
can't even read
that
Greek,
believes that.
though.
Huh?
You can't even read Greek. You can pronounce some words, but you can't read Greek.
Correct. But I can look the words up, and I know, and I'm not an idiot.
But
And when
but
it says to be born or to come into existence, I don't make excuses as to why it doesn't mean what it says.
But words, you have to understand something. Just looking up a definition of a word does not suffice in context. And the reason why is because words have a semantic domain that is determined not by a definition, but by the contextual and linguistic structures in which they're used. So it's an authorial definition.
So to me, that's people trying to pretend to be smart to say the Bible doesn't say or mean what it means because it is against their doctrines. So
Well, no,
I
sir,
don't.
that's just how
Yeah.
language works. For
So
example, what does echad mean in Hebrew?
it means one.
Right? And when Adam and Eve became husband and wife, the text says that they became one flesh. They became echad, but were they still two individual people?
Yeah, but I can show you. So the word ihad does not mean. So the word ihad does not mean, by definition, a plurality of unity. It does not mean that.
Right, but I'm
the
saying
context is what determines whether it's right.
You just made my argument for me. The context is what determines the meaning.
Right. So when Jesus says, "I am the only begotten Son of God," how does the context change it from what it actually means into something else?
Because again, nagenes is coming from, is a derivative from. If you look at the entire context of what Jesus is saying there, and what has already been said previously in places like John 1, John 1:18.
Okay, stop. So it's not the context; it's the doctrine that changes it. Because you're saying if you go somewhere else, it says that he is something else. So
No.
It's not the context that you're talking about; it's your doctrine that changes.
No, I'm saying there's an immediate context, but then there's also
So let's turn to John chapter 3.
Book.
So John chapter 3, verse 16, everybody's favorite verse. I want you to tell me what in the context of John chapter 3 that says that Jesus was not ever born.
Yeah, so again, in your book, well, this is just kind of a critical thinking experiment. In your book, would you have wrote in chapters 1 and 2 stuff that would have been pertinent to chapter 3?
Well, it's a logical progression. So
it's a logical progression. So if John begins his book with certain things that he's trying to get people to understand about Jesus, wouldn't that have to be the context that we'd have to understand the rest of what John says?
So even John chapter 1 says he became flesh.
Yeah, the word became flesh after it gives this very strong argument in John 1 that the Logos was eternal.
Right, but Logos is not a person. Logos is not Jesus' name. It's not even who he is. So it says in the beginning, God had a message. That's what Logos means. It is a message. It is a word. It is a doctrine. It is a plan. That's what verse 1 means.
Actually, no. Logos has a very wide semantic domain. It could mean it could mean plan. It could mean message. It could mean word, or it could mean account. It could mean a matter. It could mean a physical object.
Right. It's never another God, though. It's not the name of another God.
Well, John's not making an argument that there's another God. He's a monotheist.
So, the Trinitarians use John 1:1 to say that there were two gods in the beginning. It was the high God and it was the Logos God.
No, sir. That's not what Trinitarians believe. That's a straw man. There is one being of God, but there is two persons presented because they both share the one divine being. That's what John 1:1 says.
They share, but yet the Old Testament says, "I share my glory with no one." Yahweh says, "I alone am God, and I share my glory with no one."
Right, which means there's only one God. But
and it means that he's not sharing it with another person. He is the only one, Unitarian, one God. Well, he's all by himself.
See how you're having to assert that rather than demonstrate it from the text? Because the text is...
No, it doesn't. It specifically says, there is no other besides me. I am the only one.
Yeah, no other God. We believe that. We're monotheists. We don't believe there's another God.
But what you believe is not remotely logical. It makes absolutely no sense.
It's what's forced upon us if you use biblical categories. So in John 1, you have ein arche, ein hologos, kai hologos, and proston theon, kai theos, ein hologos. Now, in John 1:1c, you have a descriptor, an adjective, if you will, of the nature of the word. The nature of the logos is described as God. So as to his very nature, he was deity, or he was divine.
God was?
The word. Because the subject is logos and remaining through the
So you're assuming that logos is a person. Logos is not a person.
No, sir. John assumes that because he goes on to say at the bookend of verse 18 of chapter 1 and verse 18, no one has ever seen God, the monogenes theos, the only God who is at the Father's side, which corresponds with John 1:1, who was with God. In the beginning was the Word was with God. And then he goes on to say, the only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known.
No. So in John 1 verse 18, it says no one has ever seen God. So I've got the NIV and it says, I think it's a horrible translation, but I'll read what it says. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. So when you look at this, this is after Jesus has already ascended into heaven. And it says Jesus is now at the right hand of the Father in heaven. It's John 1:18 is not saying that he was with God in the beginning. He's saying he's with God now because he's already died and gone to heaven.
Well, no, that's exactly what he's saying, because in verse 2 of John, he goes, and he was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him.
So verse 2 is talking about the beginning. Verse 18 is talking about now. So we're talking about the beginning.
How do you make a break in the context between verse 2 and verse 18? Where's the break?
Because one is talking past tense and one is talking present tense. It says he is in closest relationship with the Father. Not that he was in closest relationship with the Father, but that he is.
No, that's exactly what verse 1 says. It says, and he was with God.
Was in past tense. Was is past.
Yeah.
Is current.
It's an eternal past.
Right. So verse 1 and 2 is talking about the past. Verse 18 is talking about the present.
So when it says, in him was life, and the life was the light of men, is that only true in past tense?
Well, he's only making a point about the past tense. You can extrapolate if you want to, but if you just take the text for what it says, you have to take in consideration the verb tense.
Well, again, the verb tense is a little bit ambiguous on some places.
Well, so do you think in verse 18, does it say he is in closest relationship with the Father, or he was in closest relationship with the Father?
It says who is at the Father's side.
Right, so that's present tense. So if you want to say what it says, you say he's talking about Jesus after he already died and ascended. So he's now in the presence of the Father, in the bosom of the Father. He died and went to heaven in verse 18. In verse 2, he's talking about some beginning, but if you go to 1 John 1, the beginning, the NRK, is talking about the beginning of the gospel, not the beginning of Genesis chapter 1. So you can make the point that John 1:1 is not even talking about Genesis 1. It's talking about Matthew 1.
How would you make that argument?
Okay, 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. Also, the correlation between 1 John 1:1 and John 1:1 is extreme. They both use RK and they both use
It's an extremely
logos.
common term.
So they talk about the logos in the beginning. 1 John 1:1 and John 1:1. 1 John 1:1 says that which was from the beginning, NRK. Same word that's used in John 1:1.
Yeah, so that which is from the beginning as opposed to in the beginning. Is there two different subjects there?
It's RK. It's the exact same word in both verses.
But the term for but here's the thing is it's not being modified by the imperfect form of I me there, is it?
So you're saying because it says that which was from the beginning and in the beginning, that necessitates that it's two different beginnings?
No, I'm saying there's two different contexts. There's two different things that John is writing about. Just because he uses the same word for beginning doesn't mean that he doesn't have two different contexts.
I think you would be obligated to start with the assumption that he's talking about the same thing, if the same person's using the same word, that you would have to demonstrate that he means something different.
Yeah,
Instead of saying, well, even though he used the same words, he means something different.
Just read the text. That's which was from the beginning, that which we have heard. Obviously, he's not talking about in the beginning was the word.
Right. So it is an assumption in John 1:1 that he's talking about Genesis 1:1. That's an assumption.
No, sir. That's not. When did you ever hear me make that claim?
Do you not think John 1:1 is talking about Genesis 1:1?
There might be a parallel in terms of the word order there, but I think what John is demonstrating is he's demonstrating the eternality of the Logos.
Right. So he's going all the way back to the very beginning of creation, Genesis 1. That's you're assuming that John 1 is talking about Genesis 1. Eternity, past.
Well, I mean, not necessarily. I mean, there's debate as to whether Bereshit is referring to a specific point after God created, because it could Genesis 1:1 could be in the beginning when God created. It could be translated as that
okay.
as well.
So I think what you're saying is just because beginning is used, Bereshit or RK, either one, it does not necessarily mean the beginning of time. It could mean the beginning of different things. You know, we could say the beginning of our debate, or the beginning of our conversation on TikTok, or the beginning of our relationship.
I'm saying there's a different function between how the Greek is used with the imperfect form of I me in John 1:1 and the bait preposition in Genesis 1:1. Because the term for beginning in Genesis 1:1 is Reshit. You have Bereshit, which would be in the beginning.
All right, so we can table this discussion for now. So let's talk about what we would even title the debate.
Okay.
I would say, did Jesus exist?
Well, I think that we would have to establish some bounds there, though, if that's going to be
so we should at least say, did the so let's make it more descriptive. Instead of making it super simple, let's make it descriptive. So is the biblical Jesus accurately portrayed, or something like that?
What about this? Is was Jesus a made-up character by the Greeks, or something along those lines? Because that's typically kind of one of your talking points on some of your backgrounds. You'll say something along the lines of Jesus was a demigod.
Yeah. So sure. Was Jesus a demigod? I like that. Was Jesus a mythical demigod? I like that.
Okay, we could do that.
Was Jesus a mythical demigod? That's cool. Especially since the name of my book is Jesus Demigod.
Yes.
So you're fine with that? Was Jesus a mythical demigod?
Was Jesus a mythical demigod? Sure. Yeah, we can do that.
All right.
That sounds catchy enough.
Yeah, because, did Jesus exist? That's kind of boring. But was Jesus a mythical demigod? Yeah, that's cool.
Which I think that title allows for more theological discussion as opposed to just purely historical discussion too. Which is what we just got into. So
say that again.
Well,
I was reading comments.
Oh, I was going to say, I think the title allows for a theological discussion too, in addition to a historical one, as opposed to just a strictly historical one, which I think is necessary because we just got into a theological.
Right, and I think that's where it gets more interesting anyway. Really, if we were handcuffed to only talk about history and not theology, then it would get. I think it would not be as interesting.
Yeah. So then I guess you would take the affirmative, and then I would take the negative on that point.
Yes. So I will say Jesus is a mythical demigod, and you're taking the position that the Bible, what the Bible says about Jesus, is reliable.
Well, I mean, just for the purpose of the debate, I would just be taking the negative stance. Then how I argue from that would be from a conservative, Christian point of
Okay,
view.
so I guess we don't have time. So you're not going to respond in the affirmative at all. You'll just be responding in the negative.
Um, I could probably do some more affirmative stuff in the rebuttal, but typically, if you take the negative the portion in the debate, then yeah, I would just be arguing from a negative point of view.
All right. So who would go first, you or me? So I guess I'm the affirmative. I would go first, right?
Yeah, probably.
So I would give my 20 minutes on why I think Jesus was a mythical demigod, and you'll give 20 on why he's not a mythical demigod.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would go straight to a rebuttal and then a cross-examination, right?
Yes.
And so the rebuttal needs to be directed at what the other person said,
Yes.
not just another prepared speech. So this is why, and it helps for preparation's sake. If we were infallible and had perfect memories, then you say, well, you really don't even need to prepare for the rebuttal. You just need to respond. But that gets difficult on the spot sometimes. It's like, so I would like to know some of your talking points in your opening statement, so that my rebuttal could be tailored to your response instead of me trying to guess what you're going to say.
I guess maybe if you wanted to do something along the lines of typing up our opening argument and then giving them to each other.
Right. That would be the ideal thing to do. Go ahead and because I would prefer to just have a PowerPoint, just put it on PowerPoint and present the PowerPoint, and I could show you my PowerPoint, and you could rebut my PowerPoint, I'll rebut yours, and I think the audience would appreciate that if we're focused on actually what the other person said. And then for cross-examination, I think if we have each other's opening arguments, we should be able to prepare our cross-examination from that.
Yeah, which, I mean, typically I might have like one or two made up questions, but typically they'll probably just be, at that point in time.
Right.
So,
and I think so the last debate, I didn't realize that there was like two. It was either two cross-examinations or two rebuttals, and I thought there was only going to be one, but I had enough material that I was able to fill the space. I didn't have to ad lib or anything. But do we want to have two rebuttals or just one rebuttal and one cross-examination each?
I mean, the only thing we could do two rebuttals, but the second rebuttal would just either be finishing what you didn't get to say in the first rebuttal, or we're trying to rebut something in the cross-examination.
Yeah. So I think one should be fine. And as we're preparing the material, we might say, you know what, I feel like I need more than 10 minutes here. I may need 20 minutes. And as we're preparing the material, and so when you're doing it blind, you don't know how much time you need. But if we actually prepare and show each other our work, then I think we can have an idea how long it'll take.
So are you thinking 20 minutes for opening statement?
Right now, yeah. 20 opening and maybe 15 rebuttal and 10 cross-examination. I don't know what that is.
I would probably say maybe 5 to 10 for the rebuttal, and then 15 to 20 for the cross-examination.
Okay. More time for cross-examination?
Yeah.
All right. People like that part the best.
The audience can hear both sides interact,
Right. Right. So we're keeping the rebuttal small so that we can have more time for cross-examination.
Yeah.
Sounds good. But rebuttal would come second.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So how many debates have you done?
Rebuttal. Formal debates. not too many, because it's hard to get people to do formal debates nowadays. But informal debates, I mean, probably at least.
Look at Miss Universe. She says Jeff going to confess that Jesus is the Christ. That ain't going to happen, Miss Universe.
Well, not by anything I say, certainly. That would take a supernatural divine act for that to happen.
You're kind of are you not going to give your name as we advertise for this? Or?
Yeah, maybe. I'm not really good at doing like advertisement and stuff. So maybe if you make a video, I might just put it on my page or something. But
yeah, I mean, we just make some TikTok videos and announce the date and the time and the location and try to get.
And we have to find a moderator too.
Well, I've had people that responded to my TikTok video, but one of them is Princess. She's an ex-Muslim on the other side of the world. So she said she wanted to be moderator, but I don't think she would be a good one because
that time difference there would be
right.
Which I think we're at a time difference right now too.
Well, you're in Texas. We're in the same time zone.
Oh, Tennessee's not on Eastern time?
No, I'm in Middle Tennessee. So
okay.
Tennessee in Eastern Tennessee is Eastern time zone, but Middle and West Tennessee is Central.
Okay, yeah. Well, I got family in East Tennessee. That's why I thought that. Okay, so that makes things a lot easier then. So cross-examination, we're saying 20 minutes or 15 minutes?
So if we go 20 and 20, that's 40. Mm-hmm. And if we went 10 and 10 for rebuttal, that gets us to an hour. And if we could go 15 and 15, and that would get us to an hour and a half, and then 30 minutes question. So we could go 20, 10, and 15.
How many cross-examination sections do you want to have?
I'm thinking just one.
Just one?
And then we get cross-examined by the audience or questions.
Right. So it would be 20 minutes cross-examination, 10 minutes you questioning me, and 10 minutes me questioning you.
Well, so what I just said was 20 minutes opening statement, 10 minutes rebuttal, and 15-minute cross-examination.
So we'd only have 7.5 minutes to question each other?
No, 15 each.
So it's 30-minute cross-examination section.
Yeah, total. Yeah. So what I'm saying is 20 and 20, 10 and 10, 15 and 15. I think that works out to an hour and a half. So 20 and 20 is 40.
Yep.
Then 10 and 10 gets us to the hour, and then 15 and 15 gets us to an hour and a half, and then we got 30 minutes of audience.
Yeah, so 20 minutes each, 10 minutes each, and then 15 minutes each.
Yeah, 20, 10, 15.
Okay. And then you said how long for audience questions? 10 minutes?
Well, I said 30 minutes, but 30. Usually I don't know.
That's a lot of questions.
Right. So if we don't get questions, we could just continue our cross-examination. If we have more questions for each other, we could just continue it.
We could do that. I see that getting kind of unorganized though, because then we would have to reestablish the time and who gets what and everything kind of on the fly.
Well, at that point, I think it's open forum really. So once we open it to the audience, if you've got some questions that didn't get answered, then even if you took the entire time asking me questions and I didn't get to ask you, or if I said, I've got some questions I still haven't got to ask you, once you ask me one question or whatever, I say, now let me ask you one.
Well, we don't have to go up to 2 hours. We could just do maybe 10 minutes of audience questions, and then you do whoever the question is directed to, we could give maybe 2 or 3 minutes to answer, and then the other person maybe a minute to have his comments.
Are you talking about in the final portion?
Yeah,
the audience.
Well, do you want to have a closing statement?
Oh, yeah, I guess we. Well, we probably should have, and I think that should be.
We don't
5
have
minutes.
To. I mean,
Well, I think it would be. I think we should at least say 5 minutes for.
Okay, so maybe we could do that before the audience questions then.
I don't know. I was thinking right before we close out, like, just saying thanks for doing this, and this is my position, and I'll go read my book
So,
where I've outlined it.
audience questions and then closing statements, I guess, maybe closing statements.
Yeah, and I
4 or
think
5
it's
minutes.
just not, that shouldn't even be timed. It just shouldn't be a long thing. People are at the end of
Yeah.
2 hours. People are ready to close
So
this thing up.
maybe no more than 5 minutes.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
just an untimed closing remarks that doesn't
Okay.
take long. Everybody's ready to go home at that point.
Sounds good to me.
So listen. What do you have? What's your education and degrees?
Bachelor of Science in Biblical and Educational Studies, concentration in Biblical Theology, and then I'm getting a Master of Theology as we speak from Dallas Theological Seminary.
So a bachelor's of science.
Yeah, because it's biblical and educational studies. But a concentration in biblical theology. So I had to go through all the theology courses, but it was also educational courses as if I was going to be like a public school teacher.
But that's education. It's not science. Why would it be a bachelor of science?
Hey man, I didn't make the degree. I just got it.
Because I have a bachelor of science and a master of science, but mine's actually in science.
Well, you can have a Bachelor of Science and maybe not STEM, which I mean science of education, but
Well, but there's they have education degrees.
which it is in part an education degree, but it's in a concentration of theology.
Yeah.
So it was kind of it was almost like a dual major, but it wasn't.
Yeah, but you didn't take chemistry and physics and stuff like that.
I took chemistry and I took a bio lab.
That was required for your theology degree?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds weird.
Well, it's more of a general ed kind of thing, but because they taught the education department taught as if you were going to be a teacher in like elementary school or middle school, and so they gave you like a survey of all the different classes you could teach.
Okay. Are you going to get a PhD?
I probably would either get a PhD or maybe a THD, Doctor of Theology. But the THM that I'm getting right now from Dallas Theological Seminary is 120 credit hour master's degree. So it's kind of like a Master of Theology and a Master of Divinity in one, which cuts down a lot on the doctoral work.
What is it? So what is the school? Is it a particular association with a denomination?
Dallas Theological, I think, is non-denominational in ecclesiology, but I got my undergrad from Liberty University.
And tell me what Liberty University is.
It's a pretty standard Christian college, Bible college, which you can get master's degrees there. They're both accredited universities,
and it's in Texas.
Liberty is in Lynchburg. Dallas is obviously in Dallas.
Right, but Lynchburg's in Texas, right?
No, Lynchburg, Virginia.
Oh. So I had another guy say he would debate me, but I looked at his YouTube and not his YouTube, but his TikTok, and he seemed like a lunatic. And I'm like, I don't think this is not the image that I want to portray, but you, I think you fit what I think. You're a smart guy. You're trained and educated in theological things, and can, I don't know, you know more about Greek and Hebrew than I do. I'm a layman, but I don't think, I would debate Bart Ehrman.
Yeah.
I would like to debate the Bart Ehrman. I've challenged, what's Inspiring Philosophy's name? Do you know?
Michael Jones.
Michael. So I deliberately, specifically challenged him. I wanted to debate him, but he won't acknowledge it. And I made a video for Dan McClellan. Like, I didn't challenge him to a debate. I just said, I'm a mythicist and I want to know why you believe that Jesus existed. Can I ask you some questions, maybe in a live TikTok? And he won't acknowledge it. So,
Well, typically when you get people with that amount of following, they, because I'm still kind of small time, and so people usually with a bigger following, they tend not to talk to people who don't have a similar following. So it's unfortunate, but it's the way things are.
well, but see, I know that. Did you say Michael Jones? Is that his name?
I think that's what his name is. Yeah.
I thought it was Michael because I think I asked him one time and I remembered Michael, but he didn't tell me his last name. But he was going to debate Sons of God ministry on TikTok, and he don't have any theology degrees, so.
Well, not necessarily the degree, maybe just like the following, like how many followers.
Oh yes, he does have more followers. Yeah.
Yeah, he has significantly more followers.
Yeah.
Which I don't. I only have like maybe like 5,000, a little bit over 5,000.
So, I mean, I can contact the same guy that I did the debate through before, and I'm sure they would host it. And I mean, that's really the only resource I know of. We could just do this on TikTok. As long as we have a moderator that his only job is to watch the clock and to, and I sure hope that I'm not ever going to attack you personally, and I don't think you're going to attack me, so I think we're good there. Now, I might say, like stuff like I said today, the Trinity position is illogical and irrational. It doesn't make any sense.
You're trying to critique a position, though. You're not critiquing a person.
Right. Because
which is why I even agreed to this before, because we've had interactions in the past, and you've never thrown out a bunch of ad hominems.
I only do that. I don't want to do that. Don't want to do that. But whenever people start judging and criticizing me, then I'll get into the mudslinging also. But so as long as you don't start doing it to me, and I would like to not even do it if you did it to me, but my animal instincts sometimes take over.
Well, and I want to kind of maybe preface though, but like when earlier when I was saying, asking you, okay, well, do you speak Greek? Do you speak Hebrew? That wasn't me challenging you as a person. That was just me challenging the understanding of the claims you were making.
Right.
So I wasn't trying to be offensive of that.
And so, I'm not pretending to be a scholar. I am a layman, but I believe that I have studied the Bible more than most laymen, more than some scholars.
Unfortunately, that's not saying much, though. Most laymen don't really do that much studying. Right. Not to say that you haven't studied, but to say it's more of a chastisement against the people who haven't studied.
Right. So I do respect you as a person and as an intelligent person. So that's what I needed for somebody in the debate. So
yes, sir. Well,
you fit the bill.
I appreciate that, and that's why I even offered to do it, was because I know you were at minimum going to try to be intellectually honest about things, and that's so much more ground that's covered in a debate than somebody who just throws out a bunch of ad hominems.
Yeah, that's worthless. I mean, even when I do get into those battles on TikTok, I feel miserable. I don't like doing it, and because I want to appeal to honest people, and if I'm yelling and screaming and calling people names, then I realize I'm losing the respect that I want from the people that I'm trying to reach. So, I don't want to come across as a enraged lunatic like I do sometimes.
Yeah.
So we just need to, I'm thinking it should at least be a month from now. So it's August. It should be in the end of September, tentatively, right now.
Maybe tentatively. It really depends on how long maybe it takes me to work through all of the material, because I'm also doing studying, and I also teach regularly at my church.
Right, we can put it tentatively in October right now.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
So because I just want to, I got to prepare my PowerPoint slides.
Yeah, well, and
But
I'm sure you got just life stuff and other stuff that you're doing too.
yeah,
So
but I mean, my job is pretty laid back, so it's
okay.
possible my PowerPoint will be done this week.
Oh, okay. Yeah. See, I have a 20 slide PowerPoint that I'm working on this week. That's due by Thursday. So
Yeah. So let's just stay in touch. And you're in my Discord, right?
yes, sir. Yep.
So that's probably the easiest way to message me sometime.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, and yeah, I'll shoot you a message if I want to get maybe clarification on something you wrote in your book, or if I'm asking where what specific source you used for something.
yeah. So most of that stuff that uh, if I'm quoting any church father, I probably, I got a lot of information from Wikipedia, but I got a lot of information from earlychristianwritings.com or earlychristianwritings dot something. I don't know what it is.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna get off of here because I have work in the morning, but this was good for setting things up and brought a lot more clarification.
So the name of the debate is: Was Jesus a mythical demigod?
Yeah, was Jesus a mythical demigod? Question mark.
Good deal. All right. Thanks for stopping in, and thanks for scheduling it. And I think it'll be interesting.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
You too.